In the 1990s, after decades of relatively steady increase, crime rates in the United States began a sharp and surprising decline. Two American economists, Donohue and Levitt, have argued in their best-selling book Freakonomics that the complete legalization of abortion in the US between 1967 and 1973 resulted in a significant drop in the crime rate from the 1990s onward. Their reasoning is, legalized abortion led to less unwantedness, unwantedness leads to high crime, legalized abortion, therefore, led to less crime. However, this argument has been challenged by other economists, who note several errors in Donohue and Levitt's calculations and findings. Some contend that the decreased crime rate can be linked to the simultaneous decline of the crack cocaine epidemic. Others challenge Donohue and Levitt for failing to separate criminals into age categories, since the decrease in crime actually occurred among older cohorts rather than those born after the legalization of abortion. In fact, crime has been increasing among these younger cohorts. Another challenge to Donohue and Levitt's findings is that since abortion was legalized in the UK, crime rates there have risen. Researchers have also pointed out that the rise in abortion since its legalization has increased the incidence of single motherhood, in part because treating abortion as a method of birth control enables men to opt out of commitment. Since the children of single-parent families are at higher risk of criminal behavior than those of two-parent families, it is more likely that the rise in abortions has increased, rather than decreased, the crime rate. Additionally, high-risk mothers are less likely to abort than low-risk mothers. Much of the research done in the past decade casts doubt on whether Donohue and Levitt's supposed link between abortion and falling crime rates exists at all. In November 2005, Federal Reserve Bank of Boston economist Christopher Foote and his research assistant Christopher Goetz published a working paper, in which they argued that the results in Donohue and Levitt's abortion and crime paper were due to statistical errors made by the authors. The omission of state year interactions and the use of the total number of arrests instead of the arrest rate in explaining changes in the murder rate. When the corrections were made, Foote and Goetz argued that abortion actually increased violent crime instead of decreasing it and did not affect property crime. They even concluded that the majority of women who had abortions in the 1970s were middle-class whites rather than low-income minorities, as Levitt stated. This was, they stated, because white middle-class women had the financial means for an abortion. Freakonomics also commented on the effects of an abortion ban in Romania, stating that compared to Romanian children born just a year earlier, the cohort of children born after the abortion ban would do worse in every measurable way. They would test lower in school, they would have less success in the labor market, and they would also prove much more likely to become criminals. John DiInardo, a professor at the University of Michigan, retorts that the paper cited by Freakonomics states virtually the opposite of what is actually claimed. On average, children born in 1967 just after abortions became illegal display better educational and labor market achievements than children born prior to the change. This outcome can be explained by a change in the composition of women having children. Urban, educated women were more likely to have abortions prior to the policy change, so a higher proportion of children were born into urban, educated households. Other researchers have argued that the removal of lead from gasoline in the late 1970s under the Clean Air Act is an additional important factor in explaining the decline in crime in the 1990s. The main result of the research was that changes in childhood lead exposure are responsible for a 56% drop in violent crime in the 1990s. This links in with my other video on the replication crisis, especially in the social sciences and economics. In January 2006, Donohue and Levitt published a response, in which they admitted the errors in their original paper but also pointed out Foote and Goetz's correction was flawed due to heavy attenuation bias. The authors argued that, after making necessary changes to fix the original errors, the corrected link between abortion and crime was now weaker but still statistically significant, contrary to Foote and Goetz's claims. Foote and Goetz, however, soon produced a rebuttal of their own and said that even after analyzing the data using the methods that Levitt and Donohue recommend, the data does not show a positive correlation between abortion rates and crime rates. They are quick to point out that this does not necessarily disprove Levitt's thesis, however, and emphasize that with data this messy and incomplete, it is in all likelihood not even possible to prove or disprove Donohue and Levitt's conclusion.